Welcome all. I think we'll get started now. Welcome to this briefing on Permanent Standard Time, the Natural and Healthy Choice, presented by the Coalition for Permanent Standard Time. Thank you all for arriving. Thank you, Office of Debbie Lesko, for providing this venue for us. We have a nice agenda for you this morning. I'll start by introducing the Coalition for Permanent Standard Time. And then we have experts in sleep and circadian biology as well as standard time who will talk to us about the biology of our body rhythms as well as the positive impacts of standard time on health and other societal priorities. And we'll also talk about a previous experiment with daylight savings time that was a failure. And then at the end, we'll have a chance for questions and answers. By way of introduction, my name is Vishesh Kapoor. I am a professor of medicine at the University of Washington, where I direct the sleep medicine program for the Division of Pulmonary Critical Care and Sleep Medicine. I'm also happy to be a member of the board of directors of the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. The American Academy of Sleep Medicine is the largest professional organization representing sleep clinicians. We have 11,000 members. Our mission is to enhance sleep health. And one of the major public health issues that we're concerned about is daylight savings time, which has large detriments to public health. And because of this, we've sponsored a coalition for permanent standard time. And our partners in this coalition include nonprofits such as Safe Standard Time and the National Sleep Foundation, as well as sleep research societies such as the Sleep Research Society and the Society for Research on Biological Rhythms. Our coalition goals are to highlight the need for change of the current system of biannual clock change and the benefits of going to permanent standard time as a clock schedule and the harms of daylight savings time. And our goal is to eventually implement permanent standard time for the United States. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Karen Gamble, an expert on sleep and circadian biology.
Hi, I'm Karen. I am a professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Neurology at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. And I'm excited to talk to you today about the basic principles of the biological clocks that are inside our bodies. And so our body's normal functions are best at certain times of the day. And this obviously applies to sleep, but what you may not know is this actually applies to all sorts of physiology of our bodies. So for example, your muscles work better at certain times of the day, for example, the late afternoon, and your blood pressure and your core body temperature dip in the night when you should be sleeping, and your testosterone is higher in the morning when your alertness is higher as well. And so all of these rhythms are orchestrated by a primary central clock in the brain. And it rules all of these other rhythms. And so this is due to information that comes in from the eye about light that's in your environment. And within this primary clock, there are nerve cells that are oscillating every 24 hours according to their own internal cellular clock. And so light is really, really important for synchronizing these cells in your brain's biological clock to the environment that's around you. And so what happens when this clock sees light at the wrong time of day? So if you'll look first at this video that's here on the left, what you'll see is this is a really sped up video of the internal clock that's in a rodent brain. And these individual cells you can see are going up and down together, and it's happening every 24 hours. And so this network is in sync. But what happens when these animals see light at the wrong time of day if you look at the video on the right, you can see that these cells are all sort of marching to the beat of their own drum, and they're really out of sync with one another. And so what you have to remember is that this clock controls all of the timing of all of the other things that I told you about just a second ago. And so it's not just your sleep that gets messed up, but it's all of your body's physiology. And so when we think about daylight saving time or standard time, you have to think about when light is affecting your body. And so let me walk you through this map. If you'll focus on the one on your left over here first, what you'll see is these vertical dotted lines. And those vertical dotted lines are the ones that indicate when the sun is centered at noon. Okay, so noon and sun are in perfect alignment. And when these time zone boundaries were originally set up, they were set up according to these solid lines. And so you can see the 4 different time zones going across the United States. And we'll focus here on the central time zone. And you can see this icon of the sun is right where it's centered over noon. But then over history, gerrymandering moved these edges, the eastern edges, a little bit more. And so the boundaries became more westward. And you can see that with the color. So for example, the eastern time zone, the green sort of blends in across that vertical line, that solid vertical line. And so what happens is on the map on the right over here, when we go into daylight savings time, now not only are we off by within the edges of this time zone, but now you're off by as much as 2 hours. And so if we stay on permanent standard time in the winter, this is really going to be exacerbated. And just on a personal note, I will point out that I grew up in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which is on the western edge of the eastern time zone, so right here. And when I was waiting for the bus in high school, I waited for the bus for 30 minutes in complete darkness. And so, and that was when we were on standard time in the winter. And so you can imagine how much more of a problem this is going to be for our children. And in high school, they're driving. So they're brand new drivers driving in the dark on the way to school. And so this is a real problem. So I'd like to ask you, how would you like to start your day? So these are some examples of what it will look like outside and what type of light you will be exposed to when it's 8 a.m. in the morning in January. This is an example from Washington. Down here we have Texas, and then over here we have New York, and we have Georgia. And so I would like to contend, morning light is really, really important for the internal clock in your brain. That is the most important signal. It's more important than sunset, actually, for synchronizing your body's rhythms to the world around you. And so for this reason, we have many of the sleep organizations have joined with us and with all of these organizations like the American Medical Association to support permanent standard time. So they've actually published 3 position papers, so you can find these if you look them up. And one is from the Society for Biological Rhythms, for Research in Biological Rhythms, SRBR, another from the Sleep Research Society, and then a third one from the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. So at the end of the day, what I hope that you will remember from what I've told you is that the timing of light exposure is very, very important for your synchronizing our body's internal rhythms to the world that's around us. And if we have daylight saving time year round, it will cause light to hit our brain's clock at the wrong time of day. And this is especially hard for those who are living on the western edges of our time zones. And it's way worse in the winter when the days are shorter. And these facts have been recognized by different science and health organizations. And as a result, they fully support year-round permanent standard time. Okay, so our next speaker is Dr. Beth Mallow.
Thank you so much for setting that up for us, Karen. I really appreciate it. And welcome, everyone. I'm really glad you're all here. I'm going to speak on the health aspects. And one thing that I think is really helpful is to think about short-term and long-term. So when you think about the short-term, we're thinking about that abrupt change that we do twice a year. And it's kind of, people have described it as a jolt to the system, that you need that extra coffee, like you could see that pail of coffee, right, that you need when it becomes daylight saving time in March. And The reason that it's a jolt to the system is we do lose that hour of sleep, but we're also, off in terms of our alignment, as we just heard. And it seems like the fall is not as bad when we go back because we're gaining that extra hour. But in the spring, we see uptick in heart attacks, strokes, medical errors, not wanting to have something like go into the hospital or have something. Doctors and nurses just aren't at their best when they've had that change. And also mood. Mood can be affected, particularly in kids. And this can have an effect for several weeks. People just don't feel, everybody's different, but some people just don't feel right. They feel off kilter. They describe it. I take care of a lot of kids with autism in my practice, and the parents say they're just not right for that time. So that's what happens with the acute effect. Now, the other thing to keep in mind that a lot of people forget about or aren't aware of is that when we're on daylight saving time for almost 8 months of the year, we're also off kilter. What's happening, as we just heard from Karen Gamble, Dr. Gamble, is we're shifting light. The clock change that goes with daylight saving time is shifting light from the morning to the evening. So yeah, we're getting more afternoon, evening light, but the price we pay is we're not getting that light in the morning. And we need that morning light to wake us up, get us going, boost our mood. It actually affects how much sleep we get at night. Like if you get your morning light, it's easier to get to sleep at night. And when you're not getting that sleep, people have shown that even losing 30 minutes of sleep can contribute to obesity and diabetes and even some of those other effects like heart disease and stroke and various other conditions are affected when we don't get that morning light. And we also feel like we're just not on sync. And different people feel this differently than others. People who are affected the most are kids who are trying to get up and go to school. We heard the example of Karen waiting for school in the dark in Chattanooga. So the idea of driving to school when they're sleepy already and it's dark outside, and then our essential workers, our firefighters, our medical professionals, people who have to get up early for to open a grocery store or small business, farmers, they're all affected because they need that morning light. And what's interesting, this is a YouGov poll. A lot of times these polls ask Americans, do you want daylight saving time? Do you want standard time? Do you want to stop going back and forth? This poll actually looked at Americans' values. And they asked questions like, what do you want to do with the time? And they wanted the option that was healthiest, most in line with our circadian rhythms, like we just heard about, that promotes safety in the morning for our kids, for themselves, for commuters, for children going to school, and makes people sleep better at night. And morning light aligns us so that we can get a better night's sleep at night. So these are the three top values. And as you can see, those are the values that align with standard time because we optimize our light in the morning. So my key takeaways from a health perspective are, in and of itself, going back and forth is disruptive to human health. Most Americans agree we should stop changing the clocks. But where we want to land is on year-round standard time because it supports sleep. We get more sleep with standard time because of the morning light aligning us. It helps physical and mental health, boosts our mood. When we use light boxes to treat seasonal affective disorder, which is worse in the winter when the days are shorter, we prescribe light boxes in the morning. That's when it's most effective. And Americans' values line up with year-round standard time. So now I have the pleasure of introducing Karen Johnson to tell us about society effects.
Oh, I got it. We got it.
Well done, well saved. This somehow.
I think we can do without the plug.
Yeah.
I think we got, that's just power, right? So this leads me right in to the importance of sleep on safety. We set that up well. I'm a neurologist. So needless to say, I do think the brain is the most important organ. Beth just highlighted on how in the long run, being off with our clocks, with our circadian rhythms affects all our physical health, risk of cardiovascular disease, obesity, cancer, all of those things are affected. But when we think about the greater effects on society, it really has to do with what's happening with our brain. So when we don't get enough sleep, when our sleep is misaligned, when our circadian rhythms are just off, our brain isn't functioning as well. So looking at some of these little icons around the circle, sports, we know sports performance, reaction time, speed, things like that aren't as well. We know athletes are more likely to get hurt and have injuries. There's studies looking at business leaders, CEOs, their ability to make decisions, their ability to work with their team is impaired. There's studies of police officers as showing more likely to have racial profiling and have issues related to that when they're more sleep deprived or when their rhythms are off. Learning, tons of studies on kids with not doing as well as school, not getting as high test grades. All of that is affected. Sleep, obviously, how we can fall asleep, how we can get good quality sleep, get the right timing of sleep. Workplace injuries go up. Car crashes go up. A lot of people think that when the light is out later that there will be less car crashes because that's when more people on the road. Studies actually show the opposite, and that's because of the effects of the brain. There's so many aspects of being alert, making good decisions. We know texting while driving goes up when you don't sleep well. Drunk driving goes up when you don't sleep well. So all of these things come together. And again, we mentioned that teenagers are the most affected, and we know that they're responsible for over a quarter of the largest percentage of fatal car accidents. Even things like crime, again, there is a worry that if it's darker later, that might be bad for crime, but the decision to do criminal things actually grows up. We see that teenagers that don't get enough sleep are more involved with drug use, with alcohol use, with criminal behaviors. I want to highlight one study I find fascinating, and I think it really just shows the effect on the brain. So Indiana used to be, for most of the state, the part in green here, on standard time, and the edges were on seasonal daylight savings time. So not even all year round, but just with seasonal daylight savings time, they looked at over 10 years of SAT scores, and they found that overall there was a 16-point average lower SAT scores in the part of the state that was on seasonal daylight savings time. But this did not affect people evenly. So it was 49 points lower in the students that had the lowest income and only 8 points lower in the highest income. And there's reasons for this. So when we don't give kids enough time to sleep, it does disproportionately affect those kids that do tend to have the earlier start times, that maybe already have living situations that already make it so they aren't getting enough sleep. And so we see these sleep disparities. And so standard time just exacerbates that problem, but it affects them the most. I mentioned the driving study. So this was the study that looked at areas that are more aligned or within a half hour of the sun being overhead at noon, and they had 20% lower fatal car crashes than the parts of the country that would have those later sunrises and sunsets, just like we get when we're on daylight savings time. And then the economy. People worry about what effects standard time versus daylight savings time will have on the economy. And so on the one side, you do have some data that does show that, especially in the spring and fall, right, as you're adding that sort of extra hour of light at the end of the day with daylight savings time, that you'll get more retail business, more people will be out golfing and having barbecues. Now those effects are, most extreme in the spring and fall, and weather and other factors will come in more as you get into winter and summer. But when you look at the economy, it's really important to think about the people and the workers. And so on the other side, you have most professions have to start their work at 8 a.m. or earlier. A lot of our essential workers, our construction workers, our transportation workers, our factory workers, they're all getting up and getting to work earlier. And we know that if you have to start your job by 8 a.m. or earlier, you're more likely to lose sleep when those sunrises and sunsets are an hour later. It's about 19 minutes on average. Now, if you have a job that starts at 7 a.m., now you're losing even about 36 minutes of sleep on average. So we disproportionately do affect our workers, and we know that lower income workers and we know that minorities are about twice as likely to have those early work start times. Here's a graph from the Population Reference Bureau showing that difference between wage earners and college grads, and they have, again, a very similar graph looking at different minorities. So overall, the negative brain effects of daylight savings time are really what affects a lot of these societal outcomes, and the harms of daylight savings time outweigh the benefits of having that later light. So I do believe it's the best for safety, for education, for productivity, and we do impact certain people the most. So teenagers and those with early work and school start times are going to have the most negative effects of daylight savings time, but the most benefits if we can move to permanent standard time. And so finally, I'm going to introduce JP, the president of Save Standard Time.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, everyone. Yes, my name is Mr. JP. I'm the president and founder of Save Standard Time, and I'm now co-chair of the Coalition for Permanent Standard Time. Being not a doctor, people often ask, where do you come from this? Well, professionally, I've worked as a software engineer for much of my life, and I can tell you daylight saving time is not good for software engineering. It gets to be an expensive confusion. I am also, as a hobby, an amateur astronomer, and so I have the appreciation of knowing that the clock time is supposed to give you an indication of where the sun is in the sky. It's not just some random number. And I'm a great-grandson of dairy farmers in Iowa. And I was taught to tell the time from where the sun is positioned in the sky and make sure you get home before dark. A lot of people ask me about the history of Standard Time. There's a common myth that it was invented by Benjamin Franklin. He kind of had an idea about it, but it was a joke, really. When he was the ambassador to France, he was... when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Well, he was staying up all night in Paris and noticing people sleeping in very late in the mornings. And so he wrote a joke article, an op-ed, saying, well, what if we taxed window shutters and fired cannons at dawn? People would wake up earlier, maybe they'd go to bed earlier, and they wouldn't be burning candles all night. They'd save money. And it was a joke. But then a century later, a gentleman named William Willett in England, he was an architect who liked to play golf after work. And he noticed in the summer people were sleeping later than sunrise, and he thought, well, what if we could turn the clocks forward, make people get out of bed and go to work earlier, then I could play more golf after work in the evenings. And Parliament laughed at him. He said, that's a silly idea, just go to work earlier if you really want to go to work earlier. But he kept pushing the idea and pushing the idea. And then finally when we got to World War I, then people thought, well, if we could wake people up earlier, they'll do more work for the war effort. And so Germany instituted it, and Britain soon followed, and the U.S. soon followed as well. And now we have this problem that we can't get rid of. It was sold as to the war effort as a way also to save energy, like Benjamin Franklin saying maybe we burn less candles at night. They were saying maybe we'd burn less oil for the lights at night. That might have been true 100 years ago. We don't really have data to show that. And now in the modern era, we do have data showing that it's not saving energy. And in many cases, it's wasting energy. While we might turn off the lights earlier in the evening, we're turning them on earlier in the morning. So that can be a wash. However, when we're waking up earlier for daylight saving time, when we spring forward in March, we're often getting up in the cold and dark mornings, and we're turning on the heat. And heat is a very expensive consumption of energy. And we have the same problem as we get in the fall, in in September, October, November, as we're waiting to fall those clocks back, we find that we're getting up in the dark and we're running the lights and the heat in the morning. It can also cause more uses of air conditioning in the evenings, which is why Arizona got rid of daylight saving time in 1967. I have a quick quote that there was a study of when Indiana adopted daylight saving time in, I think, 2007. They found that it was increasing the morning heat and the evening air conditioning at a cost of approximately $9 million per year. So that's just one state. Now, there are proposals to end the clock change, and I certainly support ending the clock change with standard time, but not with daylight saving time. We've tried permanent daylight saving time before, and it doesn't go well. Famously, in 1974, for the oil crisis, Nixon called on Congress to try winter daylight time, permanent daylight time. And we quickly found that waking people up and sending them off to school or work in the dark, before the ice has melted, when people are still sleepy, that it caused a lot of problems. There were many headlines talking about critical injuries, especially for school children. There were even deaths. And it was disruptive to business as well, because people were not shopping in the mornings anymore. Construction had to wait and delay their start times because it's dark and they need sunlight, and then they would be overlapping with the morning commute and causing disruptions in that way as well. Here are two maps of the contiguous United States, and on your left, standard time. So this is what we're used to right now in the winter, early January, when the sun's coming up between 6:30 and 8 in the morning in most of the country. If we were to go to permanent daylight time, then we'd be pushing that sun to 8, 9, even 10 o'clock in the morning in some places. So I like to say I don't think anybody is asking for the government to set their alarm clock an hour early, but that is essentially what permanent daylight time would do. So my takeaways are that the idea of energy savings is a wash. It's really there's not good data behind it, and in fact there's good data showing it might be the opposite of what's intended. We've tried permanent daylight time before. I didn't mention we tried it in World War II, and it was not popular and quickly undone, but also in 1974. And if we were on permanent daylight time, the winter sunrise would be after 8 a.m. for 3 or more months in most states. It would go as late as 8:45 in the morning or later in most states. Walking here in the morning, I was seeing the people that were doing the grounds work, the security, and I imagine we're just coming on to start our days at 8 in the morning, but they've probably already been here for an hour or two. Today, November 15, the sunrise was at 6:50. If we were on daylight time, it would be 7:50. So even we wearing white collars would be getting up and going to school or work in the dark. And if we fast forward to late December and early January, sunrise in Washington, D.C. would be as late as 8:26. So again, we need that morning sun, as the doctors who came before me were talking about, and standard time is the way to ensure that we can end the clock change and keep the morning sun. Time for questions and answers. Thanks very much. I imagine we can share the slides, and the table out front, if it's still there, has some handouts and some buttons too. We love sharing data. We've got a lot of data. Yeah, when we've had permanent standard time, it has lasted for decades. But when we have permanent daylight time, we get rid of it as soon as we can.
It went from the 80s, like the American people wanted, like 80% of them wanted permanent daylight, and then it fell into like 44% after 2 months.
Yeah, it was 1970 in 1973. 79% of the public supported permanent daylight time. This is from Newark, out of Chicago, surveying 1,000 Americans. And in 1974, after we tried it, that 79% support dropped to 42%.
Similar to now, I think now if you polled Americans, they'd be like, yeah, more daylight time, just like they already did. That's why I think it's so important to remember we already tried this. We get it. That this is what you think you.
When I see a lot of poll data, and it's all over the place. The only thing that's clear is that Americans want to stop the clock change. That support is 70, 80, even 90%, depending on the poll. But when you're asking which clock do you want, it seems to be about a third want standard, a third want daylight, a third don't understand the question, don't care.
I was going to say, a lot of people don't understand, like when you ask them, when are you going to have more morning light, which they want in that poll I showed, they get confused. They don't actually know, like, which would give them more light in the morning and be safer for the commute and all, for them to commute. So a lot of it is education.
And a lot of the main states that really wanted to end the time quickest were actually the southern states, because they're the ones with the 3-4 months with it dark after 8 a.m. It's usually a long time because of the more even days.
And we saw a large push for permanent daylight time in 2019 and 20. But when I was watching those debates, they weren't even really debates. They weren't considering permanent standard time. They were just thinking that this was the only way out of it. And then now in the more recent years, 2022 and 23, we've seen a lot fewer bills introduced for permanent daylight time and a lot more for permanent standard time. So I feel that we're coming to a shift in the political momentum.
And fewer congressional legislators have signed on to the Sunshine Protection Act this year than last year. And so what we really need is a sponsor for a permanent standard time bill. And we ran into a congressman this morning who says, my wife just wants it to end. Just get it done. And really standard time is the only viable way. So if people are serious about ending time change, it really has to be the standard time. We know that daylight savings time doesn't work. We know that it's bad for health, for safety, for economy, for all these other things. So this is the way to go for people that want to end that time change, which most people do.
And we do have a draft bill for permanent standard time. We just need someone to file that bill. It's very simple. It's actually much simpler legislatively than permanent daylight time.
And standard time is federally permitted already, which is why Arizona, Hawaii, the 5 U.S. territories already follow it. But we obviously, so any state could just say, I'm going to the standard time like those areas. But we would love to do it in a coordinated fashion, and I'm sure that DOT and others would love that, as well.
Have you heard, what sort of arguments have you heard for daylight saving time, if any? Are there any arguments that you've heard that it could help?
I mean,
No,
I would say all we hear is just more sunlight, and that's kind of in general. People don't really know the specifics. They just hear, oh, this gives us more light.
yeah, I
That's
think
what it's supposed to be.
what we've talked about a lot is because it's daylight saving time in the summer, right? And it's lighter. People assume if we stay on year-round daylight saving time, it's going to be sunnier in the winter, but it's not. I mean, the days are shorter. We can't get around the sun, right? And people will say, well, it's going to be dark at 4:30. Well, it's going to be dark at 5:30 if you're on daylight saving time. But what we're doing is we're giving that morning light, which is better for health, and it's really interesting how I think people just assume, right? It's going to be super dark. But if we were on daylight saving time, it would be like endless summer at 8 o'clock in the evening. And
That's what I would have thought. That's what I would have thought.
yeah.
It's
I mean, you think about it, but then if you just think about adding an hour,
Exactly.
right? And
Right.
That's, I think, what we have to.
And if you can delay that winter sunrise from 4:30 to 5:30, you're still commuting. You're still in your car. It's cold out. it's not like you're going to go play softball or golf, I would think.
And I think a lot of people with that sun are worried about mood.
Mhm.
And so they assume if you're taking away the sun, it's going to affect my mood. But we actually have some of the best data about that. So Russia tried
Permanent daylight time,
permanent daylight
2011
savings
and 2014.
for 3 years, and there was a study, and they looked at seasonal depression. They actually found the highest rates of depression on permanent daylight savings time, the lowest on permanent standard time, and in the middle was seasonal daylight savings time. And then there was a new study that just came out this year looking at suicides, and they found that the areas of the U.S. with those later sunrises and sunsets also had higher rates of suicide. If you add it up, it's about 5,000 extra suicides a year that you can account by where you are in terms of how late the sunset is.
I mean, I think people assume I feel better at the end of the day and the light is helping with depression, but if, as Dr. Johnson's saying, the studies, which we'll get to you, support that it's actually the morning light that helps mood, mental health.
Well, and also like your point that I thought was so well said just now is that you can't. The sun is going to do what the sun is going to do. It's a fallacy that you're getting more sun. It's just changing the clock, which impacts your circadian balance.
Right.
The days are going to be shorter regardless of what the clock says.
Exactly. I think the other thing I just want to highlight Jay's point about the energy. That was a study from Indiana in 2008, right, or 2011. It was. I mean, I think if we look now, we would probably even see more energy expenditures, and that air conditioning in the afternoon. I mean, as you say, that's why
Well,
Arizona
the
is.
big thing about that paper, it was Indiana going from standard time to seasonal daylight savings time. So the winter was actually the same. So they didn't actually really take in the increase. They saw increase.
Yeah, that $9 million per year was just for
Didn't include heating up the middle of the winter.
seasonal DST, not permanent DST.
And a lot of people point to the 2008 DOT study that again just looked at the extension and suggested that there might be a little energy savings in March, in November or October. But again, that study doesn't look at the 2 times a year when there's more heating and cooling, which is the winter and summer. So our expectation, if you have a year-round analysis, and I love the DOE to really do this, is that we would see the energy costs going up. And we know that, the convenience store industry, other industries want daylight saving time because they know people drive more. And, and that's not good for our climate. It's not good for energy use as well.
Although I just met this golf pro on an airplane, and he was saying that people will see us in the morning if it's really hot. So he sees it as a wash. So it's not necessarily that all of these industries feel like daylight saving time is better. A lot of them are really looking at standard time. So an energy analysis would be phenomenal.
Dr.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're raising a really good point about the advocacy groups that are interested in this or historically have been interested in this. And I'm curious, you mentioned that in 1974, permanent DST was tried, and that to do that now will require an act of Congress, whereas going to permanent standard time won't. We can just start that immediately. Is there any logistical barrier for us to just switch to permanent standard time? Are people hesitating because they're looking at airline schedules?
So at the state level, I advocate for state bills for state exemption from DST, which is already provided by the current federal law. And the most common concern I hear is the convenience of commerce clause. The idea that, let's say Oregon were to opt out. Well, Portland's right on the border with Washington, so half of the metropolis would suddenly be split by a time zone. So that's why just recently we've started to advise states to include a delay of the effective date, saying Oregon will opt out once Washington opts out, and try to build these local pacts. So that's a new strategy we're taking, and I'm hoping to see gains in that area. As far as federally, if Congress were to get rid of daylight saving time, I mean, I would want, probably at least a month's notice, probably 3 months' notice, because we would. There's a lot of software engineering behind this, and a lot of software is dependent on other software, so it's all connected, and you need to be testing your code. But beyond that, I don't see a problem with it.
Thank you. I have the second question. You've done a nice job of summarizing groups that have been polled and how they understand what they want would be, and we can explain that permanent standard time would help them attain what they seek. There are some groups that I've been surprised when I talk to them about these decisions that they decide what would be better for them is permanent standard time for reasons that we haven't mentioned today. So one group that I was surprised to learn was interested in what would happen in permanent standard time was folks who are in favor of religious freedom. And they talk about being able to pray before they go to work, which requires that the sun is up. And and for me, that seems like a small group that might be mobilized on this topic. Is there a large group that needs to be addressed and might help this decision?
So you're speaking of Orthodox Jewish communities and some Muslims as well that have prayers, particularly in the morning, that need to happen their time to the sunrise, and they have a certain duration that they need to be performed. So if the sunrise were at 8:30 or 9 or 10, then you'd have to carve out time in your work day, and that's awkward. So we do find those communities come out in opposition to permanent daylight time. Even for some Christians, standard time has been nicknamed God's time because it's the time that's set to the sun, the natural world or God's creation. So it can have holiness for many peoples of faith. We are reaching out right now to members of transportation and safety. Certainly, this issue is important for those who drive buses, fly planes, plow the roads. We want to make sure that they have adequate durations and quality of sleep, and standard time best facilitates that. There's also, historically, farmers have always been against daylight saving time. The industry of farming has changed a lot over the last century as it's moved less family farming and more industrial farming. So we need to have that conversation with them as well.
I was just going to add on the religious aspect. I've also heard from Jews and Muslims the evening prayer idea that they have several times a day that they pray, and if the light is too late in the spring and summer, they can't go to sleep on time because they have to do that final prayer, and sometimes they'll congregate to do that final prayer. So it can really cut into their sleep time if you're on daylight saving.
It really matters the duration and quality and timing of sleep, as you of course know. But I mean, I flew in here last night from Arizona, and I made a concerted effort to try to get to bed early and not expose myself to too much light at night, because it's weird to try to put yourself to bed while it's still light outside. Think of if you have children, and you're telling them to go to bed, but the sun is up because of daylight saving time. Notably, if you go to fireworks displays for Independence Day, they can't start till it gets dark. Maybe 10 or 10:30. You're not home until 11:30, in bed until midnight, and then it's a school night. You got to get up and go to work in the morning. So that would be easier if we were on standard time. That the sunset would come a little earlier in July.
I've thought about that a lot. We focus on the light in the morning, but Jay is absolutely right. We really also want to be thinking about the evening. And again, it's that same thing. Like people are like, well, if we go to standard time in the summer, it's going to be dark at 5 o'clock, and we're like, no.
No. We're talking about
9 o'clock.
Yeah, we're talking about 8 or 9 instead of 9 or 10.
Right, so it's only an hour. I mean, if you do the math, it's only an hour, right? Only an hour difference. But I think people assume that.
I watch our social media, so I see all kinds of comments, and so
And as the days get hotter, a lot of people are actually waiting for it to get a little later in the day for it to cool down. To be able
right, that's the lesson we learned in Arizona, and I would love for Texas to pick up on this.
From an education point of view, right, the idea, this conception, daylight saving time, kind of spreading the awareness, because I think a lot of people think daylight saving time is on both sides. They call both misconception for some cleared up and kind of education and awareness about that might help kind of change that.
It's a very confusing issue, and there needs to be ever more public awareness raised. I mean, it's easy for us, just as we're talking, to say permanent standard instead of permanent daylight, or eastern edge versus western edge, and earlier sunrise, sunset. It's easy to get confused. I mean, you can't really put your hand on time. But yeah, as much as we can do to raise this awareness would be helpful. Well, thanks everyone for attending. The coalition has a new website at ditchdst.com, and there's our email address, contact@ditchdst.com, and we're looking forward to growing this effort as we move forward. Thanks again for coming.